They built Site Erebus to listen to the whispers of the world, but all its occupants could hear was the screaming of their own machinery and the brittle echo of their voices in the cold, dead air. They had buried their fortress under 2 vertical kilometers of granite and gneiss, a technological tomb designed to survive the end of everything. Yet the silence it manufactured was more terrifying than any war. It was a silence that had weight, a coiled thing that lived in the ventilation shafts and pressed against the triple-paned polycarbonate of the observation decks. They had sought safety in the heart of a mountain, unaware that the mountain had a heart of its own, and that it was beginning to beat with a terrible, unfamiliar rhythm. This was the place they sent Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman they saw as little more than another sensor to be installed and calibrated. They saw her quiet demeanor and mistook it for timidity. They saw her focus and mistook it for detachment. They saw a scientist and they dismissed her. They had no idea they had just placed a ghost among their ranks, a woman whose true strength was not in the instruments she monitored, but in the steel forged in the crucible of a past they could not even imagine. They sought to bury her under a mountain of protocol and rank, never once suspecting she was the one who understood how mountains could be moved and how they could be made to fall. The air in the deep-level command center tasted of recycled oxygen, ozone, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. It was a sterile, controlled environment, yet Aris could feel the immense, chaotic pressure of the rocks surrounding them. She felt it not as a threat, but as a presence, a living system of stresses and strains. She was a geologist by title, a seismologist by trade, but her real function was far simpler. She was a listener. While the uniformed men and women of the Naval Directorate of Subterranean Operations watch screens filled with satellite uplinks and encrypted communications, Aris watched the slow, patient language of the Earth. Her station was an anomaly, tucked into an alcove away from the main command pit, a quiet island of sensitive equipment in an ocean of tactical displays. Her primary instrument was a gravimeter of her own design, a delicate symphony of suspended niobium and superconducting magnets, capable of detecting lithospheric density shifts so minute they were practically theoretical. To the others, she was the Rock Lady, a civilian contractor fulfilling a niche requirement, a box to be checked on a long list of operational readiness protocols. Her fingers, long and steady, made a final adjustment to a cryogenic cooling hose, the faint hiss of escaping helium, a whisper only she could hear over the constant, low hum of the station's life support. She did not wear a uniform. Her clothes were simple, functional, dark cargo pants and a plain gray thermal shirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. There was nothing about her that demanded attention, and she cultivated that anonymity. Attention was a liability. It created noise in the data. She preferred to be a ghost, a presence felt only by the results she produced. She watched the primary readout on her main screen stabilize, the sine wave of the Earth's background hum settling into a placid, predictable rhythm. Perfect. The planet was breathing, slow and deep. For now. She noted the time, her keystrokes silent and efficient, her log entries precise to the millisecond. Every data point was a word, every word part of a sentence that she was slowly, patiently translating. The relative peace of the command center was shattered by the arrival of Commander Valerius. He did not walk onto the command deck. He made an entrance. He was a man carved from regulation, his uniform starched to a razor's edge, his polished boots striking the composite flooring with an aggressive rhythmic clap that announced his authority with every step. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched, as if holding back a tide of belligerent certainty. His voice, when it came, was a blunt instrument, designed to hammer home his own importance. "Status report, Lieutenant," he barked, his eyes sweeping the room, not to observe, but to inspect for flaws. Lieutenant Cale, a young, sharp officer who ran the watch, snapped to attention. "All systems green, Commander. No change in atmospheric or radiological readings. Comms are stable, running standard encryption protocols." Cale was competent, his voice clear and professional, but Eris could detect the subtle tension in his posture, the way his shoulders tightened under the commander's gaze. Valerius thrived on that tension. He fed on it. Valerius moved through the command center like a predator patrolling its territory, his gaze falling on Eris's alcove with predictable disdain. He stopped, his shadow falling over her console. She didn't look up, her focus remaining on the data stream from a deep Earth sensor she was cross-referencing. "And what is this?" Valerius's voice was laced with a theatrical sort of curiosity, the kind that precedes a dissection. Cale stepped forward. "That's Dr. Thorne, sir, our attached geological specialist." "Doctor," Valerius repeated the word, stretching it, infusing it with condescension. "I am aware of the doctor's function, Lieutenant. I am asking what, precisely, she is doing. This is a military command center, not a university laboratory." He directed the question at Cal, but his eyes were fixed on the back of Eris's head, a clear power play. She was the subject, not the participant. Eris completed her data entry, saved the file, and then, with a calm that seemed to suck the air out of the immediate vicinity, she turned in her chair. She did not stand. Her eyes, a cool, analytical gray, met his. There was no defiance in them, no fear, no emotion at all. It was the gaze of a camera, simply recording. "I am correlating gravimetric data with resonant frequency readings from the Teton array," she said, her voice quiet, yet it carried with an unnerving clarity. "There is a micro-variation in the crustal density, a harmonic that isn't consistent with standard tectonic strain." Valerius stared at her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He had expected silence, or perhaps a flustered, jargon-filled explanation he could easily dismiss. Her calm, factual response offered him no purchase. "Micro-variations, harmonics," he scoffed, turning away from her and addressing the room at large. "While the doctor is listening to the music of the spheres, the rest of us will remain focused on actual, tangible threats. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed back from the crew. Valerius gave Eris one last dismissive look, as if she were a piece of malfunctioning equipment, and then strode toward the central command chair, his throne. The incident was over, but a new tension had been introduced into the station's delicate ecosystem. The commander had drawn a line in the sand between his world of rigid, hierarchical military order and her world of quiet, patient data. He did not yet know that the ground beneath that line was beginning to shift. The next 48 hours passed in a state of heightened, artificial calm. Commander Valerius conducted a series of grueling readiness drills, his voice a constant, abrasive presence over the station's comms. He pushed the crew to their limits, manufacturing crises to be solved by the book. He demanded speed, efficiency, and above all, perfect adherence to protocol. It was a performance, Eris noted, a display of dominance meant to reinforce his own authority. He was a man who believed that any problem could be solved by shouting at it loudly enough and throwing enough procedure in its direction. He was building a fortress of regulation, confident in its impenetrable walls. During this time, Eris remained in her alcove, a silent observer. The anomaly she had noted persisted. It was faint, a whisper beneath the roar of the Earth's normal operations, but it was undeniably there. It was a pattern, a structured, non-random signal hidden in the noise of continental drift. It was like finding a perfect, repeating musical phrase in the middle of a rock slide. Nature was chaotic, but it was not organized. This was organized. She rerouted auxiliary processing power from the station's network, careful to use only unclaimed cycles to run a deep wave analysis. The results were chilling. The harmonic was not just a single frequency. It was a complex waveform with sidebands that suggested a synthetic origin. Someone was talking to the mountain, and she suspected the mountain was beginning to listen. She approached Lieutenant Kale during a shift change, choosing her moment carefully when Valerius was not on the command deck. She presented her findings on a simple data slate, the screen showing the raw waveform analysis. "Lieutenant," she began, her tone even and factual, "the harmonic I mentioned has a structured, non-natural pattern. The frequency is shifting in a predictable sequence." Kale studied the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a communications specialist by training, and he understood signals. "It looks like frequency hopping," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "But that's impossible. You're measuring rock, not radio waves." "The medium is different, but the principle of a structured signal is the same," Eris explained. "Something is introducing energy into the bedrock in a controlled, patterned way. It's low amplitude, designed to be lost in the background noise, but it's there, and it's escalating." Kale looked from the data slate to her, his expression serious. He saw the quiet certainty in her eyes. He was young, but he was not foolish. He knew the difference between academic speculation and a professional assessment. "Have you shown this to the commander?" "The commander is not receptive to my data," Eris stated simply, without a trace of resentment. It was a statement of fact, not a complaint. Before Kale could respond, the heavy footsteps of Valerius announced his return. He saw the two of them huddled over the data slate, and his face darkened. "Lieutenant Kale, is there a problem with your watch duties that requires a consultation with our resident spiritualist?" Kale straightened, but he didn't put the slate away. "Sir, Dr. Thorne has found a persistent, structured anomaly in the seismic readings. It appears to be artificial." Valerius snatched the slate from Kale's hand. He glanced at the screen, his eyes uncomprehending, but his expression dismissive. "Artificial? Doctor, are you suggesting the enemy has developed some sort of earthquake ray? Is that what your harmonics are telling you? Perhaps you've been breathing too much recycled air." He laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. He tossed the slate onto a nearby console with a clatter. "This is a waste of time and resources. The threats we face come from satellites and submarines, not from fairy tales dug out of the rock. Lieutenant, I want your team focused on signals intelligence from hostile powers, not ghost stories from the geology department. Is that clear?" "Sir," Kale began, a hint of protest in his voice. "Is that clear, Lieutenant?" Valerius's voice dropped, becoming a low, dangerous growl. Kale's jaw tightened. "Crystal, sir." Valerius turned his gaze to Eris. It was a look of profound, undisguised contempt. "Doctor, Your contract stipulates that you are here to monitor for natural seismic events, earthquakes, volcanoes. That is all. You are not a member of the intelligence division. You are not a tactical officer. You are a civilian observer. Confine your activities to the parameters of your contract, or I will have you confined to your quarters. Do you understand me? This was the public challenge, the assertion of dominance. He had drawn his line, and he was daring her to cross it. The entire command deck was silent, watching. Eris met his glare, her own expression unchanging. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I understand the parameters of my contract, Commander. Her voice was a flat, calm surface on which his anger could find no grip. Her response was not one of submission, but of simple acknowledgement. It infuriated him. He turned on his heel and stalked away, the tension he left in his wake thick enough to choke on. Cale gave her a quick, apologetic look before returning to his post. The challenge had been made, and the hierarchy had been brutally enforced. But Eris knew something Valerius did not. Hierarchies, like mountains, were built on foundations, and the foundations of Site Erebus were beginning to sing a very dangerous song. The crisis did not arrive with a bang, but with a hum. It started as a low, pervasive vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was not the familiar, jarring shudder of an earthquake, but a steady, resonant thrum that vibrated deep in the bones. The lights in the command center flickered, the hum of the servers rising in pitch as their internal cooling fans struggled against the vibration. On the main tactical display, a dozen minor system alerts bloomed like red flowers. "What is that?" Valerius demanded, gripping the arms of his command chair. "Report! Was that a seismic event?" The on-duty seismology tech, a nervous petty officer, fumbled with his controls. "Negative, sir. The Richter scale isn't even registering a tremor. It's just vibration, a standing wave. I've never seen anything like it." But Aris had. Her eyes were locked on her own console, where the data was flooding in. The quiet harmonic she had been tracking was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. The enemy had found the resonant frequency of the granite Pluton in which Site Erebus was embedded. They were not trying to shake the base apart with brute force. They were exciting the natural frequency of the rock itself, turning the entire mountain into a titanic tuning fork. The energy required was immense, but the effect was devastatingly elegant. They were going to make the mountain tear itself apart. "It's a resonant cascade," Eris said, her voice cutting through the rising panic. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. The sheer certainty in her tone commanded attention. Valerius wheeled his chair around to face her. "What did you say?" "The harmonic. It's a resonant weapon," she repeated, her fingers flying across her keyboard, bringing up a 3D model of the surrounding geology. The model was overlaid with a shimmering, pulsing wave of energy. "They're not attacking the base. They're attacking the mountain." As if to punctuate her words, a deep, groaning crack echoed through the facility. A long, spider-webbing fracture appeared in the reinforced concrete of the far wall. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. A new wave of alarms blared, these ones far more serious. Structural integrity warnings. "Blast doors! Seal them now!" Valerius roared, falling back on the familiar litany of emergency protocols. "Go to internal power. Get me a priority comms link to Fleet Command. I want a full tactical sit rep on my desk in 5 minutes." His orders were loud, decisive, and utterly useless. He was trying to fight a hurricane by locking the front door. The threat was not outside. It was the very ground they stood on. "Sir, the comms array is offline," Cale shouted over the din. "The vibration sheared the primary conduit. We're cut off." Another, more violent shudder racked the station. This time, a section of the ceiling collapsed, raining debris onto an unoccupied console bank. The lights flickered and died, plunging the command center into the terrifying red glow of emergency lighting. The hum intensified, a physical pressure that made teeth ache and vision swim. Men and women, trained professionals, were starting to show signs of panic. Their fortress was becoming their tomb, and their commander was screaming orders for a battle that was not being fought. Valerius stood, his face pale in the red light, his confidence finally cracking. He was a man of procedure, a man of the book, but there was no chapter in the book for this. He had no enemy to shoot, no ship to target. His entire worldview, built on the solid bedrock of military doctrine, was being shaken to pieces along with the mountain. He stared at the tactical display, which now showed cascading system failures across the entire facility, his expression one of pure, uncomprehending disbelief. The orthodoxy had failed. The book was wrong, and the humming was getting louder. In the crimson-lit chaos, Eris was an island of absolute calm. The vibration was a physical assault, a disorienting wave of energy that scrambled thought, but she pushed through it. Her mind, trained in the harshest environments imaginable, filtered out the noise, the fear, the groaning of the dying station. All that remained was the data. The enemy's weapon was a masterpiece of physics, but every system, every weapon had a flaw. It had rules, and she knew the rules. She had bypassed the main network, which was now a chaotic mess of failing nodes, and jacked her personal data slate directly into a hardened maintenance port. It gave her access to the base's core engineering controls: power distribution, environmental systems, the geothermal vents that plunged miles deeper into the Earth's crust. While Valerius stared at his collapsing tactical reality, Eris was looking at the station's blueprint. The groaning of the rock grew louder, the vibrations becoming sharp, violent jolts. A crewman screamed as a power conduit overhead exploded in a shower of sparks. Panic was beginning to tip into hysteria. Valerius was frozen, his authority evaporated, leaving only a man in a uniform facing a problem he could not comprehend. It was in that moment of collective paralysis that Eris stood up. She did not seize a microphone or shout for attention. She simply spoke, her voice not loud, but clear and precise, cutting through the cacophony like a scalpel. The resonant frequency is 22.4 hertz. They are using a phased array to focus the energy. To stop the cascade, we have to disrupt the standing wave. We need to introduce a counter frequency, a chaotic pulse to break their harmonic. Every eye on the command deck turned to her. In the hellish red light, her face was a mask of pure, dispassionate focus. She was no longer the quiet rock lady in the corner. She was the only person in the room who wasn't reacting to the chaos, but analyzing it. "That's insane!" a terrified engineering chief yelled. "We don't have a weapon like that." "The base is the weapon," Eris stated, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crew. "I need control of the primary capacitor banks, the geothermal heat exchange system, and all 10 of the deep earth thermal vents. I'm going to turn this facility into a harmonic dampener." Valerius finally snapped out of his stupor, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You will do no such thing. That is a civilian scientist. She has no authority here. I am in command. Sergeant, escort the doctor to..." His words were cut off by a tremendous jolt that threw everyone to the floor. The main screen on the forward wall cracked, the image dissolving into static. The low hum had become a high-pitched, agonizing shriek. The mountain was screaming. From the floor, his face bleeding from a small cut on his forehead, Lieutenant Kale looked at Valerius, then at Eris. He saw his commander, paralyzed by the failure of his doctrine, and he saw the woman who, in the midst of Armageddon, was calmly proposing a solution rooted in complex physics. He had seen her data, he had heard her warnings, and he had watched the commander dismiss them. His training, his career, his very life screamed at him to obey the chain of command. But his logic, his instinct for survival, told him that the chain of command was broken. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring Valerius. He looked directly at Aris, his eyes clear and resolute. "What are your orders, Doctor?" That was it. The turn. The moment authority ceased to be a function of rank and became a function of competence. The engineering chief, seeing Kale's decisive action, looked at Aris, his expression shifting from terror to a desperate, grasping hope. One by one, the other members of the crew turned their attention to her, their faces illuminated by the red emergency lights. They were looking for a way out, and she was the only one offering a map. Valerius struggled to his feet, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He had lost the room. He had lost control. He was just a spectator now. Eris's gaze met Kale's. There was no triumph in her expression, only focus. Authority had flowed to her not because she had seized it, but because it had nowhere else to go. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice the calm center of the storm, "get me the chief engineer. We have less than 3 minutes before the stress fractures reach the reactor core. We begin now." The execution was a symphony of controlled chaos, conducted by a woman who saw not a failing military base, but a complex physical instrument. Eris stood at her console, which was now linked to the station's engineering mainframe. The chief engineer, a man named Brody with sweat beading on his brow, stood beside her, his headset connecting him to his teams scattered throughout the vibrating facility. Lieutenant Kale stood on her other side, coordinating the command center crew, relaying her instructions with a newfound authority in his voice. "Brody," Eris's voice was calm, almost conversational, a stark contrast to the shrieking of the tormented mountain. "I need the primary capacitor banks charged to 90%. Divert all non-essential power, all of it. That will plunge the non-critical sectors into total darkness and kill life support recycling," Brody protested, his voice tight with stress. "The sectors are already failing. Life support is irrelevant if the mountain collapses," Eris countered, her eyes never leaving the cascading data on her screen. "Do it." Brody hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded grimly. "Diverting power now." The overhead emergency lights dimmed further, the air growing thick and heavy. On a power schematic, Eris watched a massive river of energy flow into the capacitor banks. "Kale, I need a direct feed from the outer hull strain gauges. I need to know the exact amplitude of the resonant wave in real time." "Gauges are failing, Doctor. The data is choppy," Kale reported. "Filter out the noise. Give me the peaks. I'm looking for a pattern in the amplification." She was not just fighting the wave. She was reading it, anticipating its next move. The deck shuddered violently. "Capacitors at 90%, Brody yelled. "Good," Eris said. "Now, the geothermal vents. I am going to give you a sequence. You will open and close vents 3, 7, and 9, in that order, with a duration of exactly 1.2 seconds for each. The sequence must be precise. We are going to use the sudden release of superheated steam from the deep vents to create a series of targeted seismic shocks. That's insane, Brody breathed. You're talking about creating controlled underground explosions. The blowback could rupture the geothermal core. The enemy is using a pure sine wave, a single, perfect frequency, Eris explained, her fingers dancing over her keyboard, modeling the thermal to kinetic energy transfer. We are going to hit it with white noise, a chaotic, multi-frequency seismic burst. It will disrupt their standing wave, break the resonance. It's the only way. The timing must be perfect. Stand by. She watched the strain gauge data. The peaks of the wave were becoming higher, more regular. The enemy was pouring more power into their weapon, trying to deliver the final, killing blow. The shriek of the mountain climbed higher. Eris's eyes were narrowed, her focus absolute. She was watching the wave, waiting for the precise moment of maximum amplitude. It was like timing a rifle shot in a hurricane. Valerius, forgotten in the corner, watched with a slack-jawed expression of horror and awe. This was not warfare as he knew it. It was a terrifying, high-stakes physics experiment, and the entire station was the laboratory. Now, Eris said, her voice sharp. Execute the sequence, now. Venting 3, 7, 9, Brody relayed into his headset. Deep below them, 3 massive multi-ton valves cycled open. A colossal pressure of superheated steam, tapped from the Earth's own mantle, blasted into the surrounding rock. The station felt a new series of shocks, different from the resonant hum. These were sharp, brutal, chaotic jolts. It felt as if the base was being hammered by a giant, arrhythmic fist. A crewman cried out in fear. "It's not working!" Cale shouted, his hands gripping his console to stay upright. "The vibration is getting worse." "It will," Eris said, her eyes still locked on the data. "The wave is fighting back. They are increasing their power output to compensate. Stand by to discharge the capacitors. On my mark, Brody, you will dump the entire charge from the capacitor banks directly into the magnetic coils of the primary exhaust scrubber." "The scrubber?" Brody's voice was incredulous. "That will vaporize the coils. It's a multi-billion-dollar piece of kit." "The coils are wound around a molybdenum core," Eris said, anticipating his objection. "For a fraction of a second, they will become a massive electromagnet. We are not venting steam anymore, Brody. We are going to create a targeted electromagnetic pulse, deep underground. We are going to hit the bedrock with a completely different kind of energy. We are going to scream back." The pieces clicked into place in Cale's mind. She was layering different forms of chaotic energy, a multi-pronged attack on the single, perfect frequency of the enemy weapon. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. "Stand by," Eris commanded, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The station was shaking so violently now that it was hard to think. The final moment was upon them. The mountain was about to break. "Mark." "Discharging now," Brody roared. There was no sound, no explosion, but for a single, blinding instant, every screen in the command center flashed white. The lights went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. And then the vibration, the agonizing, bone-jarring shriek of the mountain, stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. It was deeper and more profound than any silence the station had ever known. It was not the manufactured silence of a subterranean fortress, but the true, ringing silence of a crisis that is past. The emergency lights flickered back on, their red glow seeming dim and peaceful now. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. They were suspended in a moment of collective disbelief, listening to the sound of their own survival. Dust motes danced in the red beams of light. The groaning of stressed metal subsided, replaced by the faint, ticking clicks of cooling machinery. Slowly, as if waking from a nightmare, the crew began to stir. They looked at the stable readouts on the few systems that had rebooted. They looked at the cracked walls and the debris-strewn floor. And then, every single one of them, from Lieutenant Kale to the lowest-ranking tech, turned and looked at Eris Thorne. She stood by her console, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. She was looking at her data slate, watching the last echoes of the seismic chaos she had unleashed fade back into the steady, quiet rhythm of the planet. The threat was neutralized. The enemy's perfect weapon had been shattered by her perfect chaotic response. It was not a victory of firepower, but a victory of intellect. A checkmate delivered in the heart of a dying mountain. Into that profound silence, a new sound emerged. A faint, tinny voice from a single, hardened speaker on the main comms panel. A dedicated deep-line channel that had survived the onslaught. It was a voice accustomed to command, calm and measured. A voice that carried the weight of immense authority. "Site Erebus, this is Fleet Command. Admiral Madsen speaking. Come in, Erebus." Before anyone could react, Commander Valerius saw his chance to reclaim his narrative, to salvage his command. He stumbled forward, brushing dust from his now disheveled uniform. "Admiral," he said, his voice raspy, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. "This is Commander Valerius. The station was hit by an unconventional attack. We sustained heavy damage, but I have the situation under control." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched, amplifying the absurdity of Valerius's claim. When Madsen's voice returned, it was coated in a layer of ice. "I know who you are, Commander, and I have been monitoring your facility's data stream through a back-channel quantum link. I know exactly what happened. Now put Ghost on the line." Valerius froze. The color drained from his face. "Ghost, sir? I don't know who that is. There's no one by that call sign stationed here." He looked around the room, his eyes wide with confusion and a dawning, terrible dread. "Don't play games with me, Valerius." Madsen's voice was sharp now, cutting. "I am looking at the logs, the unauthorized system overrides, the geothermal venting sequence, the capacitor discharge. There is only one person on this planet with the clearance and the knowledge to orchestrate that particular brand of beautiful, catastrophic improvisation. Now, put Dr. Thorne on this channel. Immediately!" A collective silent gasp seemed to pass through the room. Every head swiveled from the stunned, broken figure of Valerius to the quiet woman who was now walking calmly toward the comms panel. Kale stared, his mind racing, recontextualizing every interaction he'd had with her. The quiet confidence, the unnerving calm under pressure, the encyclopedic knowledge that went far beyond geology. It all snapped into a new, terrifyingly clear focus. Eris took the receiver. "Madsen," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. It was not the tone of a subordinate reporting to a superior. It was the tone of an equal. "Eris," the Admiral's voice warmed instantly, filled with a mixture of relief and profound respect. "Report. Resonant cascade attack, likely from a mobile offshore platform," she stated clinically. "They found the Pluton's primary frequency. I used a chaotic seismic and electromagnetic pulse to disrupt the standing wave. The weapon is neutralized. The station is crippled but stable. The crew is shaken but alive. Valerius is incompetent. She delivered the last line with the same dispassionate finality as the rest of her report. Valerius made a strangled noise, a sound of pure protest and humiliation. Madsen's voice came back, and this time it was broadcast on the open command channel for all to hear. Commander Valerius, your own logs show that Dr. Thorne warned you of an artificial seismic anomaly more than 48 hours ago. You dismissed her. You publicly belittled her. You placed this entire facility and its crew at risk through your arrogance and your ignorance. Dr. Eris Thorne is not a civilian geologist. She is a commander in the United States Navy, on detached special duty from Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She is the foremost expert in tectonic and unconventional environmental warfare. She, in fact, wrote the entire operational doctrine on the very weapon the enemy just used against you. You weren't just ignoring an expert, Commander. You were ignoring the architect. You are hereby relieved of command. You will be confined to your quarters pending a full investigation. Lieutenant Kale, you are in temporary command until a replacement arrives. Your first order is to give Commander Thorne anything and everything she requires. The revelation descended upon the room, reordering their entire reality. The quiet rock lady was a ghost, a legend from the blackest of Spec Ops projects. A Tier 1 operator with a doctorate in geology, a woman who could kill you with a rifle or with a mountain. Valerius stood, stripped bare, his rank, his pride, his entire identity dismantled by a few sentences spoken from thousands of miles away. He looked at Eris, at the woman he had dismissed as an academic, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the steel beneath the quiet exterior, the immense, terrifying competence he had mistaken for weakness. He turned without a word and walked off the command deck, his footsteps no longer loud and authoritative, but the quiet, shuffling gait of a defeated man. A new order settled over Site Erebus. It was quieter, more efficient. The frantic energy of Valerius's command was replaced by the calm, methodical competence of Eris. She didn't issue orders in the traditional sense. She made requests, stated requirements, and the crew, now regarding her with a mixture of awe and healthy fear, carried them out with flawless precision. They worked to stabilize the station, repair the critical systems, and analyze the lingering seismic data from the attack. The hierarchy had been restored, not to the lines on an organizational chart, but to the reality of demonstrated ability. Competence was now the only rank that mattered. Eris showed no pleasure in her vindication. She did not gloat or acknowledge the change in her status. She simply returned to her work, her focus as absolute as ever. The crew, in turn, treated her with a new, profound respect. They kept their distance, speaking in hushed tones when she was near. They brought her coffee, leaving it silently on the edge of her console. They rerouted auxiliary power to her station without being asked. They understood, now, that she was not one of them. She was something else entirely, a force that had been temporarily contained within their world, and they were grateful to have been on her side. Late into the next cycle, Lieutenant Kale approached her alcove. He did not offer praise or congratulations. He knew that such things were meaningless to her. Instead, he placed a data slate on her console, just as he had done before the crisis. "Commander," he said, the new title feeling both strange and perfectly natural on his tongue. "I've compiled the post-event strain readings from the gauges that are still active. I also ran a spectral analysis on the residual EM field, as you suggested. The decay pattern is unusual." Eris picked up the slate. She looked at the data, then at Cale. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her cool, gray eyes. It was not warmth, not exactly. It was acknowledgement, a quiet recognition of his own competence. "Good work, Lieutenant," she said, her voice low. "This confirms the energy source was baryonic. They're further along than we thought." She turned back to her screen, already absorbing the new data, her mind leaping ahead to the next move in a war he was only just beginning to understand. That quiet acknowledgement was worth more to Cale than any official commendation. It was a sign that he had passed a test he hadn't even known he was taking. When the relief crew and the new station commander arrived a week later, Eris was gone. She had departed as she had arrived, silently, without ceremony. She left behind a fully stabilized, semi-operational facility and a crew that would speak of her in hushed, reverent tones for years to come. They would tell the story of the quiet geologist who saved them all, the woman who spoke to the mountain and made it fight on their side. She had left no personal effects, no trace of her presence, save for the legend she had forged in the heart of the rock. She was a ghost, a weaponized intellect veiled in academic credentials and a quiet demeanor. Her battles were not fought on open fields or in contested waters, but in the silent realms of physics, data, and the deep elemental forces of the planet itself. She moved from one crisis to the next, a solitary figure defined not by the rank on her collar, but by the sheer, undeniable weight of her competence. She sought no recognition, no reward. Her only purpose was to solve the equation, to find the flaw in the enemy's design, to be the calm, logical center in the heart of the storm. For a woman like Eris Thorne, victory was not a celebration. It was simply the restoration of order, a return to the quiet, steady hum of a world that worked as it should. And then she would move on, leaving behind a profound and lasting lesson. That the most dangerous force in any room is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who listens the closest